comes out of real protective impulses or concern that there not be suffering, it still is part of the social apparatus by which that pain is reproduced. In other words, it invariably takes part in that, even if it's not part of the intention or the conscious intention of the speaker.
Right. Okay.
I mean, that's what I'm saying, is that like if we all were told and if we all accepted that we shouldn't live certain ways of life because they were going to be painful, not only does that misunderstand that we're trying to live those ways of life because we want some pleasure or we want some, or we're having an issue of desire. Okay, that's the case. But that sense of the world as a place that will always be painful for the transgendered or for the gay, lesbian, bi, etc., that is one of the mechanisms through which it gets reproduced time and again. I mean, why not say, it's going to take some courage. I have respect for you. I mean, that's a different way of saying it might be hard, but, I'll back you up.
No, it opens up a problematic thing that I've heard, and again, that we're getting off the track, and I don't really want to do that.
No, I'm sure there's no track.
Of physically challenged or disabled people saying, that's not bravery. That people are always saying, oh, you're so brave.
Oh.
And they're like, I'm not brave, I don't have a choice. This is my situation, you know? And so to say that to the child is, again, a sort of a situation where you're ascribing something that's not necessarily a part of that.
Well, it depends on the account, and it depends what we're talking about. I mean, there are surely some transgender people and gay people, lesbian, whatever, who will say that my gender, my sexuality is not my choice.
Right.
And that this is simply an acknowledgement of who I am, and it's inbuilt or hardwired, right? But if we understand, but if that's not the discourse, then it's not at all analogous to the question of disability in that way.
Right.
And I'm not sure it's analogous anyway, but it's
it's too ambiguous.
Yeah, it's a hard conversation. I did want to just say a couple of things about melancholia before we leave. If that's okay, I'm going to just plow ahead. Because I don't know how many of you have read Freud's Main Melancholia. Some of you have, some of you have not. Okay. Well, it might be too hard to do, but let me just say this. Freud distinguishes between mourning, in which a certain kind of loss is acknowledged, and melancholia, which is a very complex phenomenon, but it has to do with the disavowal of loss or a refusal to accept a loss. And there are two basic forms that takes in his work, at least in the early work. And one of them has to do with becoming very self-berating. It's kind of an odd thing. You lose somebody, you can't quite acknowledge the loss, and you suddenly discover that you're lacerating yourself for some reason or another. Why do people do that? Well, Freud's explanation is that self-laceration is actually a way of preserving the other internally. He says somebody is speaking to somebody else. And what he actually comes to imagine is that the one who survives is actually very furious that the one who's gone. And so is berating or lacerating the lost one. But the lost one doesn't exist anymore. So it becomes part of the self. Gets housed, sheltered, preserved as part of the self. And then self-beratement becomes a way of both preserving the other and berating the other for having left. So it's a contradictory kind of formation, right? Where you come up with a psychic formation that preserves the other internally at the same time that you lacerate that other. But since that other is internal to you, you end up lacerating yourself. Okay. it becomes, in fact, the basis for his theory of the superego. You know, so it's a pretty important move in Freud's book. Now, the other characteristic that he, besides self-laceration, that he talks about is somebody who complains a lot in public. Somebody who's always being injured or insulted, and being very loud about it. Somebody who always has a complaint. And he describes this person as public, volatile, and whose complaints shift from one issue to another. And it's interesting that would become a kind of odd form of melancholia, but it seems that the person who's loquaciously complaining feels like there's some kind of deficit, some kind of loss. They've been cheated, they've been wounded, something's been taken from them. They didn't get as much ice cream as the next person, or the teacher forgot to call them, or something happened. There's some constant deficit that they're drawing attention to. And it's because the loss is not articulated as the loss of the lost object, so it becomes, in fact, distributed throughout the social sphere, and there's a kind of loquacious complaining that happens. Now, Freud's way out of this particular bind, which is not good, you berate yourself, or you advertise angrily your impoverishment, is to say that there's a certain kind of rage that's involved in loss, a rage against the lost object, which we see in the rage against oneself, but also in the complaint, the angry complaint about being slighted or deprived of something essential. And so he asks, what would it be like if the rage involved in melancholia could be dislodged from those formations? And what would it take for that to happen? And he ends up saying that you actually, that the melancholic has to give up the other. They have to break with the other, the lost other. You've already lost the other, you have to break with the lost other. Maybe undo some fidelity or commitment to that other. Even a kind of local betrayal in order to live, or to live on in a way that's not permanently debilitated by that